So for those of you who didn't see on the channel, I actually made a video a couple of days ago ranking every AFL team's 2024 AFL trade period in alphabetical order. And you know, I think for the most part, a lot of teams had a really good trade period, but then there was still like at least one or two teams that I weren't necessarily that convinced on. Again, shout out GWS for basically having at least 18 and 188 million different billion, 100 quazillion something players leave your club. Wasn't the best off season, but then also like shout out Adelaide, who I thought had one of the more really underrated off seasons that they've had since they decided to do the power stance and not make the 8 for a million years. But again, in today's video, we're actually going to be going over the next 9 teams that I didn't talk about in that video. So again, if you haven't already, there's still a big number of you guys who watch today's videos who are not subscribed. Do me a favor, be a cutie patootie, leave a like on this video and just subscribe to the channel for all that sports content and news. But you know what, let's get straight into it with the first team, and I've got the Hawthorn Football Club. You know, I was sitting there semi-debating, are they a B+ or an A-? Because they've done a lot of great things. Then I just realized that I was just allergic to giving them a B+, because you know what? They definitely deserve to be an A-. So I thought Hawthorn had a really, really good trade period where not only were they able to bring in Josh Battle for free, one of, I think, the better key backs in the AFL, but they were, of course, able to bring in Tom Barrass to the team, who has been, again, one of the best defenders in the league for the last couple of years. So you've got this extremely good young team who is really building and boosting themselves to be, hopefully for them, a premiership chance. And they just go out and, you know, sign and trade for 2 of the best defenders in the league. Yeah, it's definitely not a bad thing for them at all. The only, like, I think slight things that I didn't like about them were they did go pretty hard to try and bring in another midfielder or 2 to add as well. They went for Harry Perryman, who I thought would have been a really good get for them, who played back for GWS, but he's wanted to play midfield. They lost out to Collingwood, so I thought that was kind of an L, but also they didn't overpay like I think Collingwood have. And then again, they were interested in another player or 2 that they didn't get. So unfortunately for them, they didn't bolster up that midfield for now. But God, did they decide to go and cook with their backline. So again, I think an A- for the Hawthorn Football Club. We've also got Melbourne, which, oh geez, this is, yeah, look, my best friend is a massive Melbourne fan, and we have had a lot of different discussions and arguments about the Melbourne Demons' future and how they're, of course, handling the trade, you know, period and all of that type of stuff. And this is probably the hardest team to rank, and I'm probably going to, just for this video, give them a C, because in terms of like what we thought they were going to do, whether it was good or bad, they didn't do any of it. Again, they didn't trade Christian Petrarca, which I thought was a really good thing. I mean, no team who wanted him had extremely good value. I think it might as well be a situation where you just wait a trade period, and if he still wants out in a year, deal with it then. Then, of course, they didn't trade, you know, Clayton Oliver, which is a lot more controversial because I think if he was to be traded, he would become an elite player again. But at Melbourne, will he be that elite player ever again? It's a very hard thing to know just because of how much he apparently dislikes it there and basically cleaned out his locker, which is what a lot of reports were saying. Again, Alex Neil-Bullen, losing him for pick 28, low-key really sucks. That was the one that was making me think, God, is this a D off-season? Is this a C- off-season? But then they, you know, I've been talked into by my mate that the trade they did with Essendon, it still was a good thing. Again, from the consensus of Melbourne fans and what they believe, they traded their future first for pick 9 in a draft class that's supposed to be one of the best of all time. So now they can have 5 and 9 to really add to a semi-underrated young core that they are building. They also bring in 28 to go and help this draft and trade as well, which actually, no, I'm pretty sure they traded that. That's my bad. So yeah, just 5-9, I guess. But also in saying that, there's the risk of what happens if Melbourne are a bad team next year. I still think they will slide potentially. I think they could be a 14th like type of position again, or even like a 15th. I really don't know. I've got to see how they go with their draft and how I like it. But then there are Melbourne fans who consensusly kind of think that Petrarca and Oliver will come back next year. They'll not have any injuries and they will start to cook, and their younger key forwards will finally start to develop. So they're a team that I'm just going to wait and see before I give them a harsh grade. We also got North Melbourne, who, again, I want to say probably a C+. They got Luke Parker in, which I thought was a fantastic decision, which if they just stopped there, it probably would have been like a B off-season. They got to keep all their picks and got Luke Parker in for not much. But then they brought in, as well before that, Jack Darling, which I'm a little bit 50-50 on. Apparently, Jack Darling thinks he can get back to it and be a really good player. So we'll see if that comes true. And then the L move was trading pick 25 for Caleb Daniel. I think that was really weird. I don't understand how they were able to trade, what was it, I think 44 for Luke Parker, considering Luke Parker's a way better player than Caleb Daniel, and they had to give up 25 for him. Look, I'm not necessarily in love with that trade, but oh well. They bring in 3 really nice veteran players who they desperately need to go and help this young core out. And I mean, Luke Parker is a great player who'll be a great role player for them and just adds so much more depth. So you're realistically looking at 3 dudes who will play round 1 next year for them, and as well as their top pick. So could be looking at 4 new guys to come in and automatically take this team from like 3 wins to hopefully 5 or 6 or 7 or maybe even 8 if it all goes well. We also got next up Port Adelaide. I mean, yeah, what a disaster this off season was for Port Adelaide. This to me is it's a D-. And I agree with Kane Corns, who's a big Port Adelaide fan, who said that this was the worst off season by any team. I agree with that. They were terrible. They are so close off being an F. Like, I just think that trade they did where they brought in Lukosius, Atkins, and Richards was terrible. Atkins, why did they bring in? He couldn't get a game at Gold Coast, who are statistically a worse team than Port Adelaide. Also a very bad player with a bad contract, I think. I'm also a very unbig Lukosius fan, which a lot of you guys know. I just do not rate him whatsoever. I think he's weak as piss and he gets beaten in a lot of the contests. You also got Joe Richards. That's a good move. He'll be a good player for them. And unfortunately, they lost Dan Houston, and only in return did they get like pick 13, a 2nd round pick and a 3rd round pick, but they also lost their future first. I mean, what were Port Adelaide doing this offseason? Harry Perryman also picked to go to Collingwood over them. Isaac Cumming picked to go to Adelaide over them. Just L after L after L. I'm sure you guys have all heard about this, and yeah, it's just very unfortunate for Port Adelaide, and I don't want to keep dragging them down anymore. We'll talk about a positive story now, and that's the Richmond Football Club, who easily get an A for this trade period. Not just yet an A+, because we have to see how their drafters go, but yeah, they did something that only the Oklahoma City Thunder have done in the NBA, and basically just trade all these veterans and elite players for draft picks. So what they did, getting pick 6 and 23 for Rioli, was a masterclass. 10, 11, and 18 for Bolton and 14, masterclass. 14 for Baker, good move. Again, we've all heard about how fantastic Richmond's offseason is, and it's absolutely true. They just flat out cooked with it. They just got to go now and draft well. We also got the St Kilda Football Club, who I very much like some of the things they did. I will probably go, I think, a B for St Kilda. They lost Josh Battle, which does suck for them, but they now have 2 top 10 picks in one of the best draft classes we've supposedly ever seen. They also traded a packet of chips for a guy who has been played out of position and out of role in Jack McRae at the Western Bulldogs, who should hopefully be able to come and help their massive hole that they've got inside the midfield. And not just that, but they did some other, slight moves here and there, which I think will help them long term. Tim Members, I think, is a really good player. Let him walk because they want to try out these younger key forwards that they've, of course, got coming through. Could St Kilda be a little bit worse next year? Maybe. Could they be a little bit better next year also? Maybe. Time will tell, but they're actually building a really underrated and good young core over at St Kilda that I'm super excited to go and see. We know as well Sydney are up next, and I actually don't really think Sydney did anything at all other than trade away Luke Parker. Again, they re-signed all their players and whatnot before that, so it's just a nothing free agency in off-season. I'll just give them a C because they didn't do anything wrong, but they didn't do anything good. They just re-signed all their players and moved on an older role player who may not have gotten a game for them next season, and Luke Parker. The West Coast Eagles as well. They are the more, I want to say, interesting one in this trade period that a lot of people really disliked and hated. Again, I know a lot of people are giving them Ds and whatnot. I'm not going to give them a D. I'm going to probably just go probably a C+. I mean, yeah, I don't think they really did anything wrong. Like, a lot of people are saying, yeah, they got rid of pick 3. It sucks. It's not the best move, but they also brought in another first-round pick and a second-round pick next year for Barras and stacked up in the picks next year where they're looking at a situation of like kind of what Richmond did last year. That's what Richmond did. They traded for a future second and fourth for Soldo and just stacked it up and let players go eventually. West Coast could be in a similar situation where they're stacking up the draft and they can either go and use the picks next year or go and try and trade for a Chad Warner. They also, of course, brought in Liam Baker, who I think is a very underrated and fantastic player. Matt Always, who's one of the league's better small forwards who can definitely find a goal. And they still managed to keep a very high pick in this draft in pick number 12. So I know that people say that they don't really like what they did. At the end of the day, their draft next year it's stacked. They're going to have 2 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks. And they could still have players that maybe get shopped around next year. We heard rumors that Tim Kelly might have been looking around at Fremantle and whatnot. We've heard that Sydney could reopen interest in Jeremy McGovern eventually, etc., etc. I wouldn't be surprised if another player or two got traded next year, even like a Liam Ryan. That would help bring them in picks, and they could go full balls to the wall to try and get Chad Warner or just have a kick-ass draft next year. So I wouldn't worry too much, West Coast fans. It's not the worst off-season. I still think that actually was a pretty good one. And then again, for last, we got the Western Bulldogs, who, yeah, I mean, they lost McRae for nothing. That sucked. But they got pick 25 for Caleb Daniel. That was a big positive. They also got 17 for Bailey Smith, which, again, was a good move that they were able to do. I would give them a C+ and probably go a little bit higher if it wasn't for all these players wanting to leave and whatnot. I still think they should have tried to talk Bailey Smith into staying, but with him being out of position and not wanting to be for the Bulldogs anymore, they couldn't exactly do it. So they lose a very incredible young player, lose a lot of depth here and there as well. They brought in Matthew Kennedy. That will be a time will tell kind of situation as well. So a lot of really interesting things going on at the Doggies. I think it was an okay off-season and trade period, but they've kept Luke Beveridge, who I still think is the coach that should be easily gone in the AFL. So we'll see how this, of course, all does unfold. Again, I'd very much like to hear all of your thoughts and opinions on this in the comment section down below. Who had a good trade period and who didn't? Do you guys agree with my rankings or do you guys not? Don't forget to subscribe to my sports channel, which is this one, my IRL/vlogging channels, and my gaming channels. Links for them will be in the description down below. And I guess I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.